Her dark skin seemed to absorb the golden light of the chandelier as she sat alone at table 12, watching strangers celebrate love she'd never known, until a voice like aged whiskey whispered in her ear, "Pretend you're mine tonight." Zara Williams pressed her back against the silk-upholstered chair and wished she could disappear into its cream fabric. Around her, the grand ballroom of Schloss Neuschwanstein buzzed with laughter and clinking champagne glasses, a symphony of celebration that only amplified her solitude. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across faces she didn't recognize, speaking in rapid German that flew past her like birds she couldn't catch. She smoothed her midnight blue dress, the only formal gown she owned, and checked her phone for the third time in 5 minutes. No messages. No missed calls. Just the stark reminder that she was 3,000 miles from home, attending her college roommate's wedding where she knew exactly one person. The bride, who was currently spinning in her new husband's arms, lost in her own fairy tale. Why did I even come? The question haunted her like the ghost of every other wedding invitation she declined over the past 5 years. But when Ingrid had called, tears in her voice, begging Zara to be her maid of honor after her sister fell ill, how could she say no? Even if it meant depleting her savings account and using all her vacation days from her teaching job in Chicago. The conversation at her table flowed around her in German, occasionally punctuated by polite English when someone remembered the American guest. She smiled and nodded, sipped her wine, and tried to ignore the familiar ache in her chest, the one that whispered she didn't belong anywhere, not really. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother, "Hope you're having fun, baby girl. You deserve happiness." Zara's throat tightened. If only her mother knew how desperately she was trying to find it. "Excuse me," she murmured to no one in particular, rising from her chair. She needed air, space, somewhere to breathe without feeling the weight of 100 curious glances. The other guests probably wondered who the sad American was, sitting alone while everyone else paired off for the evening's festivities. She slipped through the crowd, her heels clicking against marble floors that had witnessed centuries of celebrations. Oil paintings of stern-faced nobles watched her progress toward the massive French doors leading to the terrace. The cool October air hit her face like a blessing, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding Bavarian forest. "What are you doing here, Zara?" The voice in her head sounded suspiciously like her ex-fiancé Marcus, who'd called her dreams unrealistic and her heart too soft for this world. Maybe he'd been right. Maybe flying halfway around the world for a friend who barely had time to say hello was just another example of her giving too much to people who couldn't reciprocate. Behind her, the ballroom's warmth spilled onto the terrace as someone else stepped outside. She didn't turn around, probably just another guest needing fresh air or a private phone call. The Alps stretched endlessly before her, their peaks touched with moonlight, and for a moment she could almost forget she was completely alone. Have you ever felt invisible in a crowd? What would make you stay or walk away from a situation like Zara's? Share your thoughts below. Your story might inspire someone else who's felt the same way. Welcome back, my incredible viewers. Your comments from the last video have been absolutely overwhelming. I can see how deeply you're all connecting with the story, and the theories you've been sharing are absolutely brilliant. Some of you are surprisingly close to the truth of what's coming next. But before we continue, don't forget to smash that like button if you're enjoying what you're seeing. Your support means the world to me and helps this channel grow. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our uploads. We're building an amazing community here, and I don't want you to miss out on what's coming. And please, share this video with your friends, family, or anyone who would love this type of content. The more people we can bring into this community, the better it gets for everyone. Your engagement in the comments has been incredible, and I love reading every single one of your thoughts and theories. Keep them coming. Now, let's go in depth into the story. Footsteps approached, measured and confident. "Expensive shoes," she noted absently. Everything at this wedding was expensive, from the crystal stemware to the imported roses adorning every surface. Even the loneliness here felt luxurious. American. The voice was deep, accented with the precise English of someone who'd learned it perfectly but would never quite lose the musical rhythm of his native German. Zara turned, expecting to see another wedding guest making polite conversation. Instead, she found herself looking into eyes the color of winter storms, gray-blue and intense, set in a face that belonged on magazine covers. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair that caught the moonlight, he stood with the easy confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. His tuxedo was impeccable, probably cost more than her monthly salary, and his watch caught the light with a subtle gleam of serious wealth. But it was his expression that made her pause, something almost vulnerable beneath the polished exterior, like he was searching for something he'd lost. Guilty as charged, she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Though I'm starting to think I stick out like a sore thumb. A smile ghosted across his lips. In the best possible way. His gaze didn't leave her face, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. Klaus Muller. Zara Williams. She shook his outstretched hand, noting the slight callus on his palm that suggested he did more than just sign checks and attend board meetings. The maid of honor, he said, and she blinked in surprise. How did you? Ingrid mentioned you. The friend who dropped everything to fly here when she needed someone. His eyes warmed slightly. That's rare. The compliment caught her off guard, and she found herself studying his face more carefully. There was something familiar about him, though she was certain they'd never met. Maybe it was just the way wealthy men carried themselves, like they owned whatever space they occupied. You know Ingrid well? She asked, genuinely curious. The guest list had been full of faces she didn't recognize, but Klaus seemed different somehow. More present. Our families have been friends for generations. Business partners, you might say. He moved closer to the terrace railing, and she caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and understated that probably cost more than her rent. Though I suspect you're having a rather different experience than most of the guests tonight. It wasn't a question, and the gentle understanding in his voice made her chest tighten unexpectedly. She'd spent the entire evening trying to convince herself she was fine, that sitting alone didn't matter, that the curious glances and whispered conversations in German weren't about her. But this stranger, this impossibly handsome, clearly wealthy stranger, had seen right through her careful facade in less than 5 minutes. Is it that obvious? She asked, attempting a laugh that came out slightly hollow. Only to someone who knows what it feels like. The admission surprised them both, judging by the way his expression shifted, as if he hadn't meant to reveal so much. He cleared his throat and straightened, the moment of vulnerability disappearing behind a polished mask. These events can be challenging when you're on your own. When you're on your own. The phrase hit her with unexpected force. Was he alone too? It seemed impossible. A man like him, with his obvious wealth and commanding presence, surely had his pick of companions. Yet something in his voice, a note of recognition, suggested otherwise. The sound of laughter drifted from the ballroom, followed by the opening notes of a waltz. Through the French doors, she could see couples taking the dance floor, spinning in perfect harmony while the bride and groom watched from their sweetheart table, hands intertwined. I should probably go back in, Zara said, though her feet remained firmly planted. The thought of returning to her empty chair, of watching other people's happiness from the sidelines, made her stomach clench. Should you? Klaus asked quietly. He turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight, his features looked carved from marble. Or would you prefer to stay out here, pretending the party doesn't exist? The question hung between them, loaded with implications she wasn't sure she was ready to unpack. There was something in his tone, an invitation wrapped in understanding, that made her pulse quicken. What are you suggesting? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Klaus was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed and seen in ways she hadn't experienced in years. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, intimate, meant only for her ears. There's someone inside I'd rather not face alone tonight. The admission seemed to cost him something. Someone who will ask questions I'm not prepared to answer, who will expect explanations I don't wish to give. He paused, and she could see him weighing his next words carefully. And you, if I'm not mistaken, would prefer not to return to that table where you know no one. Her heart began to race. Was he suggesting what she thought he was suggesting? I don't understand, she said, though part of her did. Part of her understood perfectly, and that terrified her. Klaus stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body despite the cool October air. Pretend you're mine tonight, he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. The words sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Be my companion for the evening. Dance with me. Let me introduce you as someone important to me. Give us both a reason to belong in there. She pulled back to look at him, searching his face for signs of deception or cruel amusement. But all she found was the same loneliness she'd been carrying, reflected in eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. You don't even know me, she breathed. No, he agreed, but I know loneliness when I see it. And I know that whatever brought you here tonight, you deserve better than sitting alone while everyone else celebrates. His voice dropped even lower. Help me, and let me help you. Just for tonight. The proposal was insane. Completely, utterly insane. She was a high school English teacher from Chicago who drove a 10-year-old Honda and shopped at Target. He was clearly someone who moved in circles she couldn't even imagine. What would people think? What would Ingrid think? But as another wave of laughter rolled out from the ballroom, as she imagined returning to her solitary chair and watching the evening unfold from the sidelines, she found herself considering it. Just for tonight, she could be someone else. Someone who belonged. Someone who mattered enough to stand beside a man who commanded attention simply by existing. What exactly would this involve? She asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the way her heart was hammering against her ribs. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first genuine one she'd seen from him. Dancing. Conversation. Perhaps some jealous glares from other women who wish they were in your position. The teasing note in his voice made her stomach flutter. Nothing you're not comfortable with. Simply, companionship. She studied his face again, looking for the catch, the cruel twist that would reveal this as some elaborate joke. But all she saw was hope, carefully contained but unmistakably present. Why me? She whispered. Because, Klaus said softly, you're the only person in that ballroom who looked as lost as I feel. The honesty of it, the raw vulnerability beneath his polished exterior, undid her completely. Here was this gorgeous, wealthy, clearly powerful man, admitting to feeling as displaced and lonely as she did. Maybe that was all pretense too, but something in her chest loosened at the thought that she wasn't the only one struggling tonight. Okay, she heard herself say. Just for tonight. The relief that crossed his features was so profound it took her breath away. He offered her his arm with old-world gallantry, and she slipped her hand through the crook of his elbow, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the expensive fabric. Shall we? He asked. As they walked back toward the ballroom, toward the music and laughter and spinning couples, Zara caught their reflection in the French doors. They looked like they belonged together, her dark skin a beautiful contrast against his fair complexion, her midnight blue dress complementing his classic black tuxedo perfectly. For just a moment, she could almost believe it was real. Just for tonight, she reminded herself. Just pretend. But as Klaus's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, warm and reassuring and surprisingly gentle, she couldn't shake the feeling that some pretenses had a way of becoming more real than anyone expected. The ballroom seemed to shift the moment they stepped through the French doors together. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Crystal glasses froze halfway to lips, and Zara felt the weight of 100 curious gazes settling on them like spotlights. Her instinct was to shrink, to pull away from Klaus's arm and disappear back to her forgotten corner, but his hand tightened gently over hers, a silent reminder of their agreement. Breathe, he murmured, his voice so low only she could hear it. You belong here. The strange thing was, with his words anchoring her, she almost believed it. Klaus moved through the crowd with practiced ease, nodding to acquaintances, his posture radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having to question his place in the world. But Zara noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when his gaze swept across certain faces in the crowd. Whatever, or whoever, he was avoiding was definitely here. Klaus. A voice rang out across the room, rich with delight and something that sounded like relief. Zara turned to see a stunning blonde woman approaching, her emerald green gown probably costing more than Zara's annual salary. She was the kind of beautiful that graced magazine covers, all sharp cheekbones and perfect curves, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd never doubted her own allure. Klaus's entire body went rigid beside her. Gazelle, he said, his voice carefully neutral as the woman air-kissed both his cheeks with practiced familiarity. I wasn't sure you'd be here. Darling, I wouldn't miss Ingrid's wedding for the world. You know how close our families are. Gazelle's smile was brilliant, but her green eyes were calculating as they swept over Zara with barely concealed curiosity. And who is this lovely creature? The pause stretched long enough to become uncomfortable before Klaus seemed to remember himself. His arm slipped around Zara's waist, pulling her closer against his side, and the warmth of his touch sent an unexpected thrill through her. This is Zara, he said, and something in his voice made her look up at him. The way he was looking at her, like she was precious, cherished, important, made her breath catch. Zara Williams. My. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second. My companion for the evening. Companion. The word hung in the air, loaded with implications that made Giselle's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rise toward her hairline. How unexpected, Giselle purred, extending a manicured hand toward Zara. I don't believe we've met. Are you German? American, Zara replied, finding her voice and grateful it came out steady. She shook Giselle's hand, noting the way the other woman's grip lingered just a beat too long, as if testing something. I'm here for Ingrid. We were roommates in college. Ah, the maid of honor. Giselle's smile sharpened. How quaint that you two found each other. Klaus has been so solitary lately. Her gaze flickered between them with the predatory interest of someone sensing weakness. I was beginning to worry about him. No need, Klaus said smoothly, but Zara could feel the tension radiating from him like heat. As you can see, I'm perfectly fine. The music swelled around them, and couples began forming on the dance floor as the bride and groom took their positions for their first dance as husband and wife. Zara watched Ingrid's radiant face, remembering their late-night conversations in their cramped dorm room about fairy tale endings and true love. At least one of them had found it. Oh, how romantic, Giselle sighed, though her eyes never left Klaus's face. Remember when we danced to this song, darling? At your mother's birthday party last spring. The memory hit Klaus like a physical blow. Zara could see it in the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his free hand clenched into a fist at his side. Whatever history he shared with this woman, it was complicated and clearly painful. That was a long time ago, he said quietly. Was it? Giselle tilted her head, blonde hair cascading over one shoulder like liquid silk. It feels like yesterday to me. We were so good together, weren't we? Before that silly misunderstanding. Have you ever been in a situation where someone from your past showed up unexpectedly? How do you handle those awkward moments when old feelings resurface? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories. Zara felt like an intruder witnessing something intensely private, but Klaus's arm around her waist kept her anchored to the moment. She could practically feel the history crackling between him and Giselle, the kind of shared past that left scars and unfinished business in its wake. Would you excuse us? Klaus said suddenly, his voice cutting through whatever spell Giselle was trying to weave. I promised Zara a dance. Without waiting for a response, he guided Zara toward the dance floor, leaving Giselle standing alone with her perfectly crafted smile faltering around the edges. I'm sorry about that, Klaus murmured as they joined the other couples swaying to the romantic melody. His hand settled at the small of her back, and she was surprised by how naturally her body fitted against his, how right it felt to have her hand resting on his shoulder. Ex-girlfriend? She asked gently, though the answer was written in every line of tension in his face. Ex-fiancé, he corrected, and the admission hung between them like a confession. It ended badly. Zara nodded, understanding flooding through her. She'd had her own painful ending, though Marcus had never been wealthy enough to travel in circles like this, to show up at elegant weddings and stir up old wounds with a smile. Is that why you needed a companion tonight? She asked. To avoid having to face her alone. Klaus was quiet for a long moment as they moved together across the polished marble floor. Other couples spun around them, lost in their own worlds, but Zara felt like she and Klaus existed in a bubble of shared understanding. Partly, he admitted finally. Giselle has a way of making me forget who I am now, who I've become since we ended. She sees the man I used to be, the one who thought love was supposed to hurt, that passion meant chaos. His eyes found hers, and she saw something vulnerable and honest in their depths. But tonight, with you, I remember what peace feels like. The words were so unexpected, so sincere, that Zara stumbled slightly. Klaus's arms tightened around her, steadying her, and for a moment they were pressed close enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her chest. Klaus, she whispered, not sure what she wanted to say, only knowing that something was shifting between them, something that had nothing to do with their arrangement and everything to do with the way he was looking at her. I know, he said softly. This wasn't supposed to be real. But as the music swelled around them and his thumb traced gentle patterns on her back, as she found herself getting lost in eyes that held storms and secrets and something that looked dangerously like hope, Zara couldn't remember why keeping it pretend had seemed so important. The song ended, but neither of them pulled away. They stood there in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by other couples but utterly alone in their shared moment of recognition. Another dance? Klaus asked, his voice rough with something that made her pulse skip. Before she could answer, a throat cleared behind them. They turned to find Giselle standing there with a tall, distinguished man who bore enough resemblance to Klaus to be family. "Klaus, you remember my Uncle Friedrich?" Giselle's smile was razor-sharp. "He's been so eager to discuss the merger with you. Something about finalizing the details before the end of the quarter." The words hit Klaus like ice water. Zara felt him go completely still beside her, saw the way his face shuttered closed, all warmth disappearing behind a mask of cold professionalism. "Friedrich," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "I wasn't aware you were in town." "Last-minute decision," the older man said smoothly, though his eyes were calculating as they studied Zara. "Giselle convinced me to attend. She said you might be amenable to discussion tonight." The trap was expertly laid, and they all knew it. Whatever business these people had with Klaus, Giselle had orchestrated this moment perfectly, using their shared history and his own politeness against him. Klaus's hand found Zara's, squeezing gently. "If you'll excuse me for a moment," he said to her, his voice formal now, distant. The man who had held her so tenderly just moments before was disappearing before her eyes. "Of course," she managed, though every instinct screamed at her to hold on, to not let him walk away into whatever web Giselle and her uncle were spinning. As Klaus allowed himself to be drawn away toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, Giselle turned back to Zara with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Such a lovely dress," she said sweetly. "Though I'm surprised Klaus didn't mention he was bringing someone tonight. He usually calls when he's seeing someone new." The implication was clear: you're not special. You're just another temporary distraction. But as Zara watched Klaus's broad shoulders disappear into the crowd, as she saw the way his head bent attentively toward Friedrich despite the tension in every line of his body, she realized something that surprised her. She didn't want to be temporary. Not anymore. Zara stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, watching Klaus disappear into the crowd with Giselle and her uncle. Around her, other couples continued their elegant waltz, but she felt suddenly exposed, like an actress who'd forgotten her lines in the middle of a performance. "You're not special. You're just another temporary distraction." Giselle's words echoed in her mind as she made her way back toward the edge of the ballroom, trying to look purposeful rather than abandoned. But the truth was, she had no idea what she was supposed to do now. Their agreement had been simple: pretend to be his companion for the evening. But what happened when the man she was supposed to be pretending with got pulled away by his complicated past? She found herself at the champagne table, accepting a glass from a white-gloved server more for something to do with her hands than from any real desire to drink. The bubbles tickled her nose as she sipped, watching Klaus through the crowd. He stood near the far wall now, his posture rigid as Friedrich gestured emphatically about something while Giselle hung on every word, her hand resting possessively on Klaus's arm. "You look like you could use some company." Zara turned to find an older woman approaching, elegant in the way that only came from decades of practice. Her silver hair was swept into a perfect chignon, and her kind eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled. "I'm Margot Steiner," the woman continued in lightly accented English. "Ingrid's aunt. And you must be the mysterious American who has everyone talking." "Mysterious?" Zara managed a laugh. "I'm afraid I'm not very mysterious at all. Just a teacher from Chicago who's feeling a bit out of place." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong, dear." Margot's eyes twinkled as she accepted her own glass of champagne. "Do you see how the women are looking at you? How they're whispering behind their fans?" She gestured subtly toward a group of elegantly dressed ladies who were indeed stealing glances in Zara's direction. "Klaus Müller hasn't brought a woman to a social event in over 2 years. You've caused quite the stir." 2 years. The information hit Zara with unexpected force. Whatever had ended between him and Giselle had clearly left deeper wounds than she'd realized. "I think there might be some confusion," Zara said carefully. "Klaus and we're not. I mean, we barely know each other." Margot's eyebrows rose. "Really? The way he was looking at you during that dance suggested otherwise. I've known that boy since he was in short pants, dear. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he was looking at you." Before Zara could process that statement fully, she felt a familiar presence behind her. She turned to find Klaus approaching, his face carefully composed but his eyes stormy with suppressed emotion. "Mrs. Steiner," he said, bending to kiss the older woman's cheek. "You look lovely tonight." "And you look troubled," Margot replied with the frankness that came with age and affection. "Though I suspect your evening just improved considerably." She glanced meaningfully between Klaus and Zara. I was just telling your lovely companion here about the scandal she's caused simply by existing. Klaus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Scandal. Oh, don't look so serious, darling. Good scandal. The kind that makes stuffy old socialites remember what it feels like to be surprised. Margot patted his arm affectionately. Now, I'm going to find my husband before he drinks too much schnapps and starts telling war stories again. You two enjoy the rest of your evening. As she glided away, Klaus and Zara were left standing together in a bubble of awkward silence. The easy intimacy they'd shared on the dance floor felt fragile now, complicated by whatever had transpired in his conversation with Friedrich and Giselle. I'm sorry about that, Klaus said quietly. Business has a way of intruding at the worst possible moments. Everything okay? Zara asked, studying his face. The mask was back in place, but she was beginning to recognize the subtle signs of his distress, the slight tension around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed against his thigh. It will be. The response was automatic, the kind of polite deflection he probably used in boardrooms and business meetings. But then he seemed to catch himself, remember who he was talking to. Actually, no. It's not okay. But it's nothing you need to worry about. The careful distance in his voice stung more than it should have. Right. Because this is all just pretend. Klaus's eyes snapped to hers, something flickering in their depths that looked almost like pain. Zara. Klaus. Another voice interrupted, this one younger, male, and slightly slurred with alcohol. A man about Klaus's age stumbled toward them, his bow tie askew and his face flushed with champagne and excitement. There you are, you magnificent bastard. I've been looking everywhere for you. Stefan, Klaus said with the long-suffering patience of someone used to managing drunk friends. Perhaps you should slow down on the champagne. Nonsense. This is a celebration. Stefan threw an arm around Klaus's shoulders, nearly knocking him off balance. Besides, I have news. Big news. About the Hoffman deal. Klaus went very still. Stefan, now is not the time. The Hoffman deal. Stefan continued, oblivious to Klaus's warning tone. The one that's going to make you even richer than you already are? God knows you need something to distract you from. His gaze landed on Zara for the first time, and his eyes widened. Oh, I see. Who's this gorgeous creature? Stefan. Wait, don't tell me. Stefan held up a hand, swaying slightly as he studied Zara with the intense focus of the very drunk. American, right? I can tell by the accent. And that dress, stunning, absolutely stunning. Very. He gestured vaguely. Exotic. The word hit Zara like a slap. She'd heard it before, too many times, always delivered with that same tone of fascination and othering that made her skin crawl. Beside her, Klaus's entire body went rigid. Stefan, he said, his voice carrying a warning that would have sobered most people instantly. But Stefan was too drunk and too excited by his own perceived cleverness to read the room. No, it's perfect. Absolutely perfect timing. Right when Giselle's back in town, trying to sink her claws back into you, you show up with. He looked Zara up and down with an appreciation that made her stomach turn. Well, she's certainly different from your usual type, isn't she? The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, conversations continued, glasses clinked, the orchestra played on, but in their small circle, the world had gone completely still. Zara felt the familiar heat of shame and anger rising in her chest, the same feeling she'd carried through childhood taunts and adult microaggressions, through every time someone had made her feel like her presence was an aberration, a curiosity to be examined and commented upon. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone's careless words made you feel completely out of place? How did you handle it? And what would you want someone to do for you in that situation? Share your thoughts below. Stefan, Klaus's voice was deadly quiet now, the kind of quiet that preceded storms. I think you've had enough to drink. Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive. I'm just saying. You're just saying nothing else, Klaus cut him off, stepping forward in a way that made Stefan instinctively step back. Because you're drunk, and you're being incredibly rude to someone who deserves far better than your commentary. The fierce protectiveness in his voice surprised Zara almost as much as it seemed to surprise Stefan, who blinked owlishly as if seeing Klaus clearly for the first time all evening. I didn't mean. Stefan began, But Klaus wasn't finished. You didn't mean to be offensive? You didn't mean to reduce a accomplished, intelligent woman to her appearance and ethnicity? You didn't mean to suggest that she's some kind of exotic accessory I've acquired to make Giselle jealous? Each word was precise, cutting, delivered with the kind of controlled fury that was far more intimidating than shouting would have been. Stefan's face went pale beneath his flush. Klaus, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. That's exactly the problem, Klaus said coldly. You didn't realize. You didn't think. And now you're going to walk away, sober up, and tomorrow you're going to send a proper apology to Ms. Williams for your inexcusable behavior. Of course, of course. Stefan nodded frantically, backing away like a scolded child. I'm sorry, truly. Ms. Williams, I hope you can forgive. Just go, Stefan, Klaus said quietly. As Stefan stumbled away, Klaus turned to Zara, his face stricken. I am so sorry. He's drunk, but that's no excuse. What he said was completely inappropriate, Anne. It's not your fault, Zara said, though her voice was smaller than she wanted it to be. The moment had shattered something between them, reminded her of all the reasons this pretense was dangerous. She wasn't Stefan's first target and she wouldn't be the last, but hearing those words in this fairy tale setting had been particularly brutal. Yes, it is. Klaus's voice was fierce. I brought you into this world, asked you to stand beside me, and I should have protected you better. I should have anticipated. What? That people would notice I don't belong here. The words came out sharper than she intended, born from years of feeling like an outsider, of having to prove her worth in spaces that weren't designed for her. Klaus's face went very still. Is that what you think? That you don't belong here? Klaus. She looked around the ballroom, at the sea of pale faces and designer gowns, at Giselle holding court near the bar with her perfectly coiffed friends, at the oil paintings of European nobility looking down from the walls. Look around. Really look. Do I belong here? Yes, he said without hesitation, his voice so certain it took her breath away. You belong anywhere you choose to be. And anyone who suggests otherwise isn't worthy of breathing the same air as you. The conviction in his voice, the way he was looking at her like she was something precious and irreplaceable, made her chest tight with emotion she couldn't name. This was supposed to be pretend. A simple arrangement to help them both get through an uncomfortable evening. But nothing about the way he was looking at her felt pretend anymore. This is getting complicated, she whispered. Yes, Klaus agreed quietly. It is. Before either of them could say anything else, the orchestra struck up a new song, something slow and romantic that had couples drifting back toward the dance floor. Klaus extended his hand to her, and despite everything, Stefan's words, Giselle's calculating stares, the growing certainty that she was falling for a man whose world she could never truly be part of, she found herself taking it. One more dance? He asked. As they moved back onto the floor, as his arms came around her with a familiarity that felt both thrilling and terrifying, Zara realized that somewhere between his whispered proposal on the terrace and this moment, the pretense had become something else entirely. And she had absolutely no idea what she was going to do about it. The second dance was different from the first. Where before there had been tentative exploration, careful boundaries, now there was something raw and urgent between them. Klaus held her closer, his hand splayed across the small of her back like he was afraid she might disappear. Zara could feel the tension radiating from him, the weight of whatever Friedrich had said during their interrupted conversation pressing down on both of them. What did they want? She asked softly as they swayed to the music. Giselle and her uncle. Klaus was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Friedrich represents a consortium of German manufacturing companies. They want to merge with my tech firm. That sounds good. A bitter laugh escaped him. It would be the largest deal of my career. Generational wealth. Security for thousands of employees. His jaw tightened. All I have to do is sign the papers. But the deal comes with conditions. Personal conditions. His eyes found hers, and she saw something that looked like anguish in their depths. They want stability. A proper German wife from a proper German family. Someone who understands their world, their values. Understanding hit Zara like a physical blow. She stumbled slightly, and Klaus's arms tightened around her instinctively. Giselle, she whispered. They've had this planned for months, apparently. The wedding was just convenient timing, a chance for Friedrich to make his offer in a social setting, for Giselle to remind me of what I'd be getting. Klaus's voice was flat, professional, but she could see the storm raging behind his carefully controlled expression. A reconciliation that would benefit everyone involved. Everyone except you. And you. The admission seemed to surprise them both. Klaus stopped dancing entirely, standing motionless in the middle of the floor while other couples spun around them. Zara, what I said earlier, about this being pretend. Klaus. Giselle's voice cut through the moment like a blade. She appeared beside them with Friedrich in tow, her smile sharp and predatory. Uncle Friedrich has been looking for you. The lawyers are waiting in the library. Now. Klaus's voice carried a warning. At a wedding. Business doesn't wait for convenient timing, darling, Giselle purred, her hand sliding possessively up Klaus's arm. Besides, once this is settled, we can all relax and enjoy the evening properly. Friedrich stepped forward, his expression grave but determined. The consortium has other options, Klaus. This offer won't remain open indefinitely. My colleagues in Munich are expecting an answer by midnight. Klaus looked at his watch. 11:15. The deadline wasn't a coincidence. It was designed to force his hand, to make him choose between careful consideration and potential opportunity. And if I refuse? Klaus asked quietly. Then you refuse, Friedrich said with a shrug that didn't quite hide the steel beneath. But Giselle has made it clear that her feelings haven't changed. She's willing to give you another chance, to be the partner you need for a venture this size. His gaze flicked dismissively over Zara. Assuming you're ready to be serious about your future. The insult was delivered with surgical precision, wrapped in polite language but unmistakably clear in its intent. Zara felt the familiar burn of being reduced to an obstacle, a temporary distraction standing in the way of real adult decisions. I should go, she said quietly, stepping back from Klaus's embrace. This is clearly something you need to handle alone. No. The word came out harsh, desperate. Klaus reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. You don't understand. This isn't just about business. Isn't it? Zara looked between Klaus and Giselle, seeing the history written in every line of their shared expressions, the complicated dance of two people who knew each other's weaknesses and strengths intimately. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like everyone knows exactly what they want except me. What do you want? Klaus asked, his voice so quiet only she could hear it. The question hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond their evening's arrangement. What did she want? To go back to her quiet life in Chicago, teaching teenagers about Shakespeare and coming home to an empty apartment? To pretend that the last few hours hadn't shown her glimpses of a connection she'd never believed possible? Or did she want something else entirely? Something that required more courage than she'd ever possessed? I want, she began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the intensity of Klaus's gaze, by Giselle's barely concealed hostility, by the weight of Friedrich's expectation. The ballroom felt suddenly suffocating, the beautiful chandeliers too bright, the music too loud. Time's up, darling, Giselle said sweetly. The lawyers are waiting. Klaus's hand tightened on Zara's, and for a moment she thought he might refuse, might choose the uncertain possibility of whatever was growing between them over the guaranteed security of his past. But then she saw something shift in his expression, the careful mask of the businessman sliding back into place. 5 minutes, he said to Friedrich. Let me escort Zara back to her table, and then we can discuss terms. The dismissal hit her like ice water. Escort her back to her table. Like she was a child to be deposited safely out of the way while the adults made important decisions. No need, Zara said, pulling her hand free of his. I can find my own way. Zara, please. It's fine, Klaus. She summoned her brightest smile, the one she used in parent-teacher conferences when she needed to pretend everything was under control. Thank you for a lovely evening. I hope everything works out the way you want it to. She turned and walked away before he could respond, before the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes could spill over, before she could embarrass herself further by begging him to choose her over a future that made perfect sense for everyone involved. Behind her, she heard Giselle's satisfied laugh, the sound of victory. Zara made it halfway across the ballroom before Klaus caught up to her, his hand gentle but firm on her arm. Don't walk away from me, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Not like this. Why not? She turned to face him, and the pain in his expression almost undid her resolve. This was always temporary, remember? Just for tonight. Well, the night's almost over. It doesn't have to be. Doesn't it? She gestured toward where Giselle and Friedrich waited, their expressions expectant and impatient. Your future is waiting for you over there, Klaus. Your real future. The one that makes sense. You make sense, he said desperately. You make more sense than anything in my life has in years. I'm a high school teacher from Chicago, she whispered. You're a billionaire who moves in circles I can't even imagine. What sense does that make? Klaus stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with something, some internal battle that was tearing him apart. Around them, the wedding continued, couples dancing, glasses clinking, the celebration of love continuing while their own fragile connection hung in the balance. You're right, he said finally, and the words destroyed her. It doesn't make sense. But then he stepped closer, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. But I don't care about sense anymore, he continued, his voice fierce with determination. I don't care about business deals or family expectations or what anyone thinks makes sense. I care about you. About the way you make me feel like I can breathe again, like I'm more than just the sum of my bank account and business connections. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs as she searched his face, looking for doubt, for the catch that would reveal this as another beautiful lie. But all she saw was truth, raw and unguarded and terrifyingly real. Klaus, she whispered. I'm choosing you, he said simply. If you'll have me. Not for tonight, not for pretend, but for real. For as long as you'll let me. From across the room, she could see Giselle's face pale with shock, Friedrich's expression darkening with anger. The consortium's lawyers would go home empty-handed. The deal of a lifetime would slip through Klaus's fingers. And he was choosing her anyway. The business deal, she began. There will be other deals, Klaus said firmly. But there will never be another you. The conviction in his voice, the way he was looking at her like she was the only person in the room, made her knees weak with relief and joy and terrifying, overwhelming love. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll have you. When Klaus kissed her, right there in the middle of the ballroom with half of German high society watching, it tasted like coming home. 6 months later, Zara Williams stood in her Chicago classroom, watching her students file out after their final exam of the semester. The June sunshine streamed through tall windows, painting golden rectangles across desks scattered with pencils and eraser shavings. In a few weeks, she'd be on summer break, and for the first time in years, she had plans that didn't involve grading papers and reorganizing her lesson plans. Her phone buzzed with a text that made her smile before she even looked at it. Flight lands at 6:30. Can't wait to see you. K. Klaus had been in Munich for the past week, handling the aftermath of his decision at Ingrid's wedding. Turning down Friedrich's consortium had sent shockwaves through the German business world, but Klaus had weathered them with surprising equanimity. Within a month, he'd found alternative financing for his company's expansion, investors who cared more about innovation than his choice of romantic partner. Giselle had been less gracious about his decision. The society pages had buzzed with speculation about their failed reconciliation for weeks, but Klaus had simply ignored it all. Let them talk, he told Zara one evening as they walked along Lake Michigan. They'll find something else to gossip about soon enough. He'd been right. By February, the German newspapers had moved on to other scandals, other dramas. But Klaus and Zara had remained constant, building something real from the foundation of that one impossible night. Zara finished packing her bag and headed for the door, her heart already racing at the thought of seeing Klaus again. These business trips were necessary. His company had offices in 3 countries now, but the separations never got easier. The drive to Aher gave her time to think about how much her life had changed since that October evening in Bavaria. Klaus had flown to Chicago the week after the wedding, showing up at her door with flowers and a nervous smile, asking if she'd meant what she'd said about wanting something real with him. She'd invited him in for coffee, and he'd stayed for 3 days. The long-distance relationship hadn't been easy at first. There were practical considerations, visa requirements, work schedules, the simple logistics of maintaining a connection across an ocean. But Klaus had been patient, determined, flying to Chicago every other week while Zara finished her teaching contract. In April, he'd asked her to spend the summer in Germany, to see if she could imagine a life there. I'm not asking you to give up teaching, he'd said one evening as they watched the sunset from his penthouse apartment. There are international schools in Munich that would be lucky to have you. But I want you to be sure. I want you to choose this. Choose us, because it's what you really want, not because I'm asking you to. The fact that he'd understood her need for independence, for purpose beyond their relationship, had only made her love him more. Now, as she pulled into the airport parking garage, Zara reflected on the decision she'd made. Teaching had always been her passion, but the opportunity to work at the Munich International School, to help American expatriate children navigate their new lives abroad, felt like a natural extension of everything she'd always wanted to do. And Klaus had been so supportive, even helping her brush up on her conversational German with patient evening lessons that usually ended in laughter and kisses. She found him at baggage claim, looking characteristically elegant in a charcoal grey suit, his hair slightly mussed from the long flight. When he saw her, his whole face lit up with the smile she'd fallen in love with, not the polished, public smile he used for business meetings, but the real one, the one that was hers alone. Liebeling, he murmured as she flew into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around right there in the middle of the busy airport. The German endearment still made her heart flutter, especially when he said it like that, like she was something precious and cherished. "How was Munich?" she asked as they walked to her car, her hand firmly entwined with his. "Profitable but boring," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The only good part was knowing I was coming home to you." Home. The word had taken on new meaning over the past few months. For Klaus, home was wherever Zara was, Chicago, Munich, or anywhere in between. For Zara, it was the same. They were building a life that transcended geography, anchored not in place but in each other. "I have news," Klaus said as they drove through the city traffic toward her apartment. There was something in his voice, a carefully contained excitement that made her glance at him curiously. "Good news or bad news?" "That depends on how you feel about permanent decisions," he said, and her heart skipped a beat. They were stopped at a red light when Klaus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Zara's breath caught in her throat as he opened it, revealing a ring that was somehow exactly what she would have chosen, elegant but not ostentatious, a single perfect diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the late afternoon sun like captured starlight. "Zara Williams," he said, his voice steady despite the nervous energy she could feel radiating from him, "will you marry me? Will you let me love you for the rest of our lives, whether that's in Chicago or Munich or anywhere else our dreams take us?" The cars behind them were honking now, the light had turned green, but Zara didn't care. She was laughing and crying at the same time, nodding frantically as Klaus slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. "Yes," she managed through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." "What's the most romantic proposal you've ever heard of or experienced? Do you believe in fairy tale endings, or do you think the real magic is in what comes after? Share your thoughts below. We love hearing about real-life love stories." The car behind them honked again, more insistently this time, and they both dissolved into laughter. Klaus leaned over to kiss her, quick and sweet and full of promise, before she reluctantly put the car back in drive. "There's more," he said as they pulled into her parking space 20 minutes later. "The Munich position, they want you to start as department head. And there's a house I want to show you, just outside the city. It has a garden where you could grow those vegetables you're always talking about, and enough space for the library you've always wanted." Zara looked down at her ring, at this beautiful symbol of a future she'd never dared imagine. A year ago, she'd been sitting alone at a wedding, convinced that love was something that happened to other people, something she was too damaged or too different to deserve. Now she was engaged to a man who saw her exactly as she was and loved her not despite her differences but because of them. A man who supported her dreams, who made her laugh, who had chosen her over everything else his world had to offer. "There's just one condition," Klaus said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Oh." Zara raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "Our wedding has to be better than Ingrid's," he said solemnly. "After all, we have a reputation to maintain as the couple with the most romantic beginning story." Zara threw back her head and laughed, the sound echoing off the walls of the parking garage. "I think we can manage that," she said, pulling him down for another kiss. As they walked toward her apartment building, hand in hand, ring catching the light with every step, Zara reflected on the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, she'd climbed into a car with a stranger who'd whispered a proposal that changed everything. Tonight, she was walking toward forever with the man she loved, knowing that their real story was just beginning. Sometimes the best pretenses, she thought as Klaus squeezed her hand and smiled down at her with eyes full of love and promise, had a way of becoming the most beautiful truths. 2 years later, Klaus and Zara were married in a small ceremony overlooking Lake Starnberg in Bavaria. Ingrid was the matron of honor, and she swore it was the most beautiful wedding she'd ever seen, even more romantic than her own. Zara taught at the Munich International School and started a program for refugee children learning English. Klaus expanded his business to include educational technology, inspired by his wife's passion for teaching. They spent summers in Chicago visiting Zara's family and winters skiing in the Alps, and every year on their anniversary, they danced the same song they'd shared that first night. The night a whispered proposition became the beginning of their forever. What did you think of Zara and Klaus's love story? Have you ever taken a chance on something that seemed impossible but felt right in your heart? We'd love to hear about the moments that changed your life. Share your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this tale of unexpected love, don't forget to like and subscribe for more romantic stories that will make you believe in fairy tale endings. Thanks for watching till the end. We know you loved this story, and there are many more thrilling ones waiting for you. Just click on the video on your screen to dive into the next chapter.